We're looking at Genesis, and to this point, what have we talked about? What have we talked about in Genesis?
The beginning.
Okay, we talked about the beginning, and how is the beginning?
God made the earth.
Okay, God's creative process, and if we look at one, the creation's human beings and the creation, sort of the crown of creation, and the other one, human beings are the first created. So either way, human beings, we're not just shoved somewhere in the middle. Both of them kind of establish our relationship with creation, whether creation was made for us or whether we're created to care for what God has made. I don't know that there's a huge distinction between those two, but certainly we see it in the story. So we have creation, and what's been a theme? So that's where we started. What's a theme we've looked at? What?
Sin.
Okay, we've looked at a lot of sin. And what are some of the examples of sin that we've looked at? That's sort of in this Genesis story.
Adam and Eve.
Okay, certainly we've looked right at the beginning. We've got Adam and Eve, and what was their issue? What did they end up doing?
They ate from the tree of knowledge.
They ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which actually meant what? What did that signify?
That was what God didn't want them to eat from, because He didn't want them to know, what that meant.
Okay, good.
And disobedience.
Okay, they disobeyed God. What did eating the fruit do?
It made them realize they were naked.
Well, it did. What was the impact of that tree of knowledge?
Put out of the garden.
Because you can't be in the garden. Why? What changes with Adam and Eve? And when they do it, she doesn't even have a name. She's the nameless one. What ends up happening with them when they had that has impact to us now that we still deal with? Well, sin.
Learn about it.
Faith and trust.
Well, yeah, we got faith and trust. We got sin. Remember, one of the things that happens when they eat from the fruit, now they become bound. And this is something we see, a theme that we see Paul pick up on a lot in the New Testament. We become bound. What do we become bound to do? Why do they become enslaved as a result of eating from that tree? What do they now have to do they didn't have to do before?
They have to make choices.
They have to make choices. They have to constantly choose what is good and what is evil, because now they know. And their life is always making that choice, constantly having to make that choice. And that's what we see Paul talk about in the New Testament, being set free, but we're still, we're in this period of overlap where we've experienced freedom, but we're also bound to make that choice. So this is something, that's that innocent part. That's now they have to choose. And once you have to choose, you're not innocent anymore. You're not innocent anymore. And you can't live in a garden made for you anymore. So you pay a consequence. It's sort of almost like humanity grew up, in a sense, in terms of how we view it. Now we see that as freedom. Now they get to choose. Well, no. Choice becomes bondage, because we got to do it now. If there's only good, we don't have to choose what is good and evil, because it's all good.
Do you think?
But now we do.
Do you think like the animals all? There was no. It's fighting like around the animals hating each other than the people. So you wonder if after they got that knowledge, whether or not.
Well, how would we? What does the writer or the writers of Genesis? How do you think they would answer based on what we've looked at?
He would probably. They would.
Dogs or animals had choices.
And why? What would we point to that said, this affected? How it affects, we don't know, because we don't know inside their heads. But what would we point at and say, yeah, it has affected creation? Remember the Noah story, the Lord story with Noah.
The 7 bad.
Yeah, well, that's right. The Lord story in Noah said, not the other one. The other Noah strain where humanity is is bad. Humanity is wicked. And since creation was made for humanity, it's the other one, the God story in Noah, where creation was made and human beings were made to care for creation, the writer says, look, all of creation has been affected. So I think the God writer would say, this has changed all of creation. All of creation is affected. So you could point at that and say, I think that's what's happened. So anyway, and death becomes, kind of the way we're freed from sin, and animals die. So I think theologically you could make that point. So we got this, what was the second sin we ran across?
Murder.
Okay, we got murder. Now with the first one, we got Adam and Eve disobeying God, can't be in the garden, have to make choice, life is going to be tough, but what does God do for them?
Clothes.
Makes them clothes. A little sign of grace. Makes them clothes. Cain kills Abel, fratricide. We got murder, right? Grounded in jealousy, And consequence? Cain killing his brother?
He was marked.
Cain is sent out, right? Sign of grace. Cain gets a mark. And the mark is going to help him because people are going to see it, and they're not going to kill him. And so each first one, sin, consequence, grace. Sin, consequence, grace. Noah, sin, whether it's humanity or all of creation. God does what? What's the consequence of sin? Of that sin?
He
floods the earth.
Floods the earth. Removes the protection established in creation. Removes that bubble. Opens windows in the sky. And rain comes down, chaos reestablishes. Sign of grace, though?
says.
Rainbow becomes a sign of grace. What else?
Promise, dove.
Okay, dove becomes a sign of grace. Little boat floating on the water becomes a sign of grace. All of them become signs of grace. So we've got this pattern that's established. What's the next story we looked at? Where I think humanity hits its lowest point. Tower of Babel. And what happens with the Tower of Babel? What does humanity decide?
The language is all mixed up so they can't understand.
Well, that's going to be the consequence. But what leads to that?
They're trying to build a tower to heaven.
They're building a tower, and when they build the tower, they will
Be separated or?
They will be God.
Oh,
They're building a temple to get to God.
They are going to reach God's level, so they will be eye to eye with God. They will be God. Wow.
Now, I never understood why they thought just getting up there would make them God.
Well, remember it's a story.
Yeah, well.
It's a story. But and even the writer says that story was really, really stupid. For people to make that assumption, because as the writer writes the story, what does he say about God? Remember what he says about God, which I think is not accidental. It says God is looking down on this tower.
Oh yeah, I'm watching.
That they could never do it. That was never a possibility, because it wasn't like God looked around and saw it. He
Watched them.
was looking down. So the separation was always there. And then they're scattered, right?
Make him smile.
All over the earth. And where's the sign of grace in the Babel story? No sign of grace. No sign of grace in the Babel story. But what happens in chapter 12?
He chooses Abraham.
He chooses Abraham. And it's going to be through Abraham that this scattering and all the language and all the human division is going to be healed. And I think that becomes really the theme. If you look at the Bible as a whole, that becomes the whole theme of the Bible. As you get even to Revelation, where the garden is reestablished in a new creation. Where there's there's absolute freedom, because there is no evil. And if there's no evil, we're not bound to have to decide, is this right, is this wrong? We're free. Free to be. And that becomes, I think, a pattern that we see throughout the Bible. And I think that the people who pull the Bible together will recognize it. Okay, so we got Abraham. Tell me about the Abraham story, because we're finishing the Abraham story. Literally, we're finishing it today. Tell me about Abraham.
He wants him to be be the father of
A nation.
Okay, God makes, and this becomes crucial for the Jews. Crucial for the Jews. And for early Christians. Paul spends a whole lot more time talking about Abraham than he does Moses. For Paul, Abraham's a big deal. Certainly in Romans, he is a huge deal. What is it with Abraham? What does God do with Abraham? And in fact, it isn't even Abraham, it's Abram. What does God do? He makes a covenant. A covenant is?
Promise.
A
deal.
Covenant is a deal. It's like a contract. And that's really important because contracts have two sides. Man, I was watching Judge Judy on Monday. I know. Contracts have two sides, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have two sides, you don't have a contract. You don't have a contract. It's got to have two sides. And so God makes a covenant, a contract with Abram, right? And what is the deal? In fact, he makes it several times. I mean, the covenant's been offered, is offered like 4 or 5 different times. But what's going to come from God's side? That's consistent.
He'll give them ground and stuff. All he wants is obedience.
Okay, 2 things God's going to give. And this is consistent. All 4 or 5 times, I'm not sure. He repeats the covenant. God's side is always the same, what God is bringing to the table. And it is 2 things. He's promising 2 things to Abram or to Abraham.
Father of nations.
You're going to be a father of nations. You're going to have descendants, right? You're going to have kids. Okay, boom. And you're going to have land. Those become the 2 critical things with Abram and Abraham. Okay, but this is a contract, right? This is a covenant. This isn't God just making a promise to them. Promises and covenants are different. Because a promise is something that we receive and there's nothing we need to do in return. But a covenant is a deal, is a contract. What does God want in return?
Faith and obedience.
Yes, and we see both of them in 2 different covenants. We see initially in chapter 12, I want you to trust me. I'm going to take you to a land, and I want you to trust me, that I'm going to get you there. And Abraham does what? Does what? Trust it, right? And so the land, I need you to trust me that you're going to be the father of
Nations.
many nations. Okay, that's one covenant, expression of the covenant, right? There's another expression of the covenant. That's the Lord expression. The God expression is, I'm going to do the same thing, but what do I want from you? I want obedience. I don't care about faith. I want obedience. And that's the covenant that involves something the Jews are going to see as crucial to their identity. It's going to involve circumcision. This is going to be the sign. You don't need to trust me to get your people circumcised. But you got to obey me. If I tell you to do it, you got to do it. And so we've got both of these together. I think the redactor, the one who pulls all this stuff together, I mean, they're not stupid. They know that we've got 2 different or 5 different expressions of the covenant. They recognize that they're different, but they express something a little
Differently.
Yeah, differently. The expectations are a little different, so they're not mutually exclusive. So we end up having both of them as part of this covenant, this faith, and we've got this obedience. And really both, they're tested, right? And what we've got this descendant business. We're going to be the father of many nations. How is that tested? What are some problems? God says to Abram, you are going to be the father of many nations. God says to Abraham, and he says, if you trust me, you're going to be the father of many nations. He says, if you obey me, you're going to be the father of many nations. What's the problem?
He's old.
He's old.
His wife's old.
His wife's old, right? And his wife is?
Barren.
Okay, his wife is barren. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem. So we've got this impediment in the Abraham story, right? Which God
Takes care of.
takes care of, right? Takes care of this impediment. Now Abram and Sarai, they feel they can take care of it themselves,
Yeah.
which results in
0.
Well, it doesn't result in zero. It results in a little boy named Ishmael, which becomes an issue. Becomes an issue. Hagar and Ishmael. So they decide, but that's not the way God is working. God is focused on fulfilling this promise through Sarai, and eventually, or later, Sarah. And eventually, what happens with Sarah?
She gets pregnant.
Okay, she ends up getting pregnant and having a bouncing baby boy named
Esau.
Isaac,
We're gonna get
or laughter. Happy. That's what she names, little baby Isaac. And this is great, problem overcome, but that's tested, right? And when is that
Hagar.
tested?
Hagar.
Well, Hagar is there, and what happens with Hagar? But how is even when Hagar and Ishmael are out of the picture? They have gone. He's taken an Egyptian wife. He'll later be the father of these Arabian tribes, because all of his descendants are names for Arabian tribes, 12 Arabian tribes. So he's going, even when he's out of the picture, what's the problem? What's going to be when is it tested, this descendant business?
Oh, when
Yes.
Isaac has to, they wanted a wife for him to go to a different country.
Well, even between those two.
Oh,
Abraham, what's that?
Sacrifice.
The sacrifice. Abraham, things are looking up, right? I got Isaac, a son. He's going to be the father of many nations. God's promise is fulfilled. Sarah is old, although, my gosh, he lied about her again. With Abimelech, saying she's sister, but we don't want to pay attention to that. We don't need to worry about that. It seems like things are going really well, and God, the Lord says,
sacrifice your son.
or God says, I want you to sacrifice. I want you to sacrifice your son, which means
He will have no descendants.
you're going to start the process over again. He's going to be in the exact same place he was before Isaac was born. And this is a God story, because he's testing the covenant, right?
Mm-hmm.
The covenant involves Abraham doing something. Obedient. So the question is Abraham going to be obedient to God? Because if he's not obedient to God, then the covenant is broken. There is no covenant. So, this is, what would you almost like a catch-22, if he is obedient, he's going to end up doing what? Killing his son, which will enable, is the means by which God is going to keep his end. So if he keeps his side, he's pretty much eliminating the possibility that God's going to keep his side. But if he isn't obedient, the covenant is broken, and God
won't bless him with
He
all
won't
that.
bless it because the covenant is broken. So we don't have a covenant. So the question is he going to be obedient or not? And we got a little bit of Lord's story. We got a little bit of faith in there, little bits and pieces, but it's really an obedience story. And what ends up happening?
God saves him and puts a goat, or I think it's a goat.
Is he obedient?
Yes.
Absolutely. And this very dramatic story where he has the knife in his hand, Lord have mercy, and then the angel says, don't do it. Look at that ram has his horns caught in the thicket. That's going to be the one you'll sacrifice. Do
you think that Abraham, at the time, he was obeying God and was going to do what God said, but do you think, kind of in the back of his mind, that he would kind of think, God's going to save him, God's going to save him?
Well, let me ask
What do you think?
if when you read the story, if you just read the story itself, do you get that impression?
No.
No, I don't think you do. I don't. In fact, I think that in this story, the focus is on obedience. It's not on faith. Tiny bit on faith. Because evidently there's a Lord story that's similar, because you got a little bit of that. But the primary direction is obedience. He never says to Isaac, God is going to provide another animal. the sacrifice. You're going to be okay. Never any indication of that.
No.
He says God will provide the sacrifice, but when he says it, God has provided the sacrifice.
Yes.
What's the sacrifice?
Isaac.
Isaac. So God has provided the sacrifice. And he bounds Isaac, and he does no indication that he's hesitating, waiting for God to intervene or anything. He's doing it. And so in this, and why would it be so important because remember, they're writing these stories for people who are living thousands of years before this is supposed to have taken place. Thousands of years later. These are lessons for people who are living, in 700 BC. And this, we're talking about something that would have happened, 2000 BC. So we're talking a long, long time. Why would it be so important as this redactor, the person who's putting these stories together, why is it so important that he keeps Abraham totally obedient, without any question or doubt? He doesn't even question God when God gives him the command. Why is that so important? Why would the writer say, man, we've got to keep this story. We don't want to soften this story. We've got to keep it the way it is.
Because of the covenant.
Because of the covenant. Abraham is going to be the example, not just of faith, which Paul picks up on, but Abraham's also going to be the example of obedience. It's going to be the example of obedience that Paul doesn't see as important, because Paul isn't focused on law. You don't obey the law. You're free from the law. And therefore faith becomes far more important for Paul than Abraham's obedience. So Abraham's faith becomes important. But here, it's the obedience that's important. And that seems to be the lesson here, that he is obedient. Okay, so we've gotten that test. Now what about the land? What do we have with land? Because that's only part of it. How does the land fit into this? What's that?
He doesn't have it.
He doesn't have any land. So he's rich, right? He's got all kinds of stuff, by doing some things that are questionable. But he's got a whole bunch of stuff, right? The trouble is, he ain't got no land, right? So he may have a lot of kids, but he's still an alien in a foreign land. What did we see last week?
Sarah's death.
Okay, when Sarah dies, what does Abraham do when Sarah dies?
Ask
What's that?
Buys land.
He buys a field that has a cave. And then
give it to him.
that's right.
That's the big.
In fact, they're going to say, bury her in any Hittite grave you want. Bury her in any Hittite. We'll give her a great big Hittite funeral. We'll have Hittites going nuts, partying all over the place. And he says, no, not going to do that. I'm going to buy a field. And in that field is going to be a cave. And that's where we're going to bury her. And all of a sudden, Abraham has what?
Ground.
Has ground. Not just ground in the land that God
told him to
go to. And we got that. We also have that story with Abimelech, which again comes from a different source, with the well. Who dug the well? And the well is Abraham's. So we've got this foothold now in the land. And understand, we got this covenant promise from God. And we've got what? We've got one child, right? And we have one field. That's it. That's it. But we got a beginning, right? We got a beginning. Okay, so let's start looking at, if you've got them open your Bibles to chapter 24. Because at chapter 24, we got at the beginning. Well, how does chapter 24 begin?
Saying about Abraham's advanced age.
Abraham is
Very old.
old. He is old. Sarah is
Old.
dead.
Yeah.
Sarah, she is
really old.
Yeah, she is really old. Although she looks pretty good, given the fact that she's been dead for a while. So she's gone. Abraham is an old man. The writer tells us what? Right at the beginning.
Abraham takes a new life.
He has been blessed with all this stuff. Okay. So he's been, now what does Abraham, who does Abraham call? So he's got, Abraham is an old guy with a lot of stuff.
His chief
What
servant.
does he do?
Calls his chief servant.
Calls the servant. And what does he want the servant, what's going to be the servant's job?
In charge of all the stuff.
Well, his job right here is going to be find a wife for his son. Going to find a wife for who? Isaac. Going to find Isaac a wife. And Abraham asked the servant to do something pretty strange, something I've never done. We're not giving an assignment.
Send them back to where.
Well, yeah, but even before he gives them the instruction, yeah, instead of shaking hands, he says,
Yeah, put your hand under my thigh.
put your hand under my thigh.
I thought that was strange.
Yeah, that's really odd. Why would he ask him to do that? You know, I'm thinking that if you did that in business now, you probably would be fired. Yeah, I think that when HR found out you were asking the secretaries to put their hands under your thigh, you know, that probably would get you into trouble.
Yes.
You know, it would probably, and that's regardless of gender, you know, would probably get you into some trouble. What are we witnessing here? And we've saw it before with a covenant. When God
trust.
made,
Trust.
well, we got trust. We're seeing maybe an ancient tradition. We're seeing something that people don't do anymore, but they did then, or at least they did when people read this. And so, what's being communicated is they're making a deal. Remember, we saw that covenant enacted when he cut the animals and spread them apart, and had to keep the birds off of them. That evidently that was an old way they made covenants. That's what they did. You know, like we sign a contract with lawyers standing around. You know, they cut up animals and put them in there. You know, instead of shaking hands, they kind of
Sacrifice.
shook thighs. I don't know. It's kind of puts a whole different look on Thigh Master, you know, the sort of thing. So anyway, but that's what we're seeing in probably an ancient custom. And because he's telling but not a covenant. They're not making a covenant here. Because Abraham is doing what?
Trusting.
Well, he's doing what to his servant? Yeah, he's telling his servant, I'm giving you instructions. Not unlike when I tell Diane, you know, that this is what I'd like you to do. And when I tell her that, I always ask her to put her hand right under my thigh. You know. No, I don't.
I've been through this. Let's not do this again.
No, we're not there.
Why am I glad I'm not on session?
Anyone in Kenya listening, this is not what we do in the United States. Okay.
At least not
Not to keep your job. But so he wants, and what does he want his servant? So he's going to send his servant to find a wife. The servant's going to be a matchmaker, right? That's going to be his job. And what is Abraham's big fear?
That he'd marry a Hittite.
Not a Hittite.
Or whatever they are.
A Canaanite.
Canaanite. Okay.
Canaanite. Why wouldn't he want him to marry a
That's
Canaanite?
what I wanted to know.
Yeah, that's a good question. Why would you not want your boy to marry a Canaanite?
He wants the family line to be.
Canaanites, I want you to write this down. Canaanites are no good. They are no good. Nobody wants their child to marry
I think my
a
dad
Canaanite.
had some Canaanites.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. I've dealt with a lot of couples in counseling, and I think sometimes a woman will use a different word to describe her husband that's left. And it's not Canaanite, but that's how I translate it. Because Canaanites are no good. Why are they no good? No good. Good. That's all. You just put C, no good. You know, Texas. You know, you can use that as why are they no good? Why are Canaanites no good?
Thieves?
Well, Canaanite. Ugh. Why are they no good?
They live by different standards of human.
Well, you're darn tootin', they live like animals. They're awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're disgusting. Canaanites are disgusting. Why are they so disgusting?
I don't know, honestly.
Oh, yeah, you do.
That's where descendants of Cain.
Ah, well, not descendants of Cain, the descendants of Canaan. And what was the issue with Canaan?
Murder.
Well, not murder. You got a story, but a different story. Remember Noah?
Oh, they're drinkers.
No, not drink. Noah drank and then did what? Barb knows. What did Noah did after he got drunk?
So it was what, daughters?
Didn't? No, that was a lot. Yeah. Boy, because I thought you knew. You were laughing, and I thought you knew. What did Noah do after he got drunk? He was naked.
Oh, yeah.
He was naked, not naked. Naked. He was naked. Not unlike a lot of folks in Florida. You know, did you hear about? But he was naked. He was naked, and who sees him in his nakedness? Which son? Ham. Ham sees him when he's naked, and Ham has a bouncing baby boy named Canaan. And Noah said, Ham, you and Canaan, bad news. You are cursed because you saw me when I was naked and you told my brothers.
Why
or told
was
your
that
brothers.
so bad? That was his father, and that's the way he was sleeping, and he went into his tent. What's he going to do if he wanted to go in and get his dad, and he's laying there naked? It's not his
Well, one, Jews were really conscious of this.
Oh.
This was something that
Okay.
later Jews be. And he, instead of covering his dad up, he went out and said to his brothers, go in there, look at Dad. He's naked.
He's naked.
You know.
Facebook wasn't there,
Yeah, that's right.
Or Facebook.
That's exactly right. Get your camera. Get your cell phone right now. Because Dad is naked. And the other boy said, are you kidding me? What are you doing? Looking at your naked dad. And so Canaan is cursed. So a Canaanite they're not just, they're cursed by God. And it's no accident that it's going to be the Canaanites that they're going to push out of the land. You know, so the land is occupied by these disgusting people. And so when we read in Joshua, when God tells Joshua, when you go into this land, as you conquer the land, way later, you conquer the land, and this is going to be your land, I want you to do something for these Canaanites that shows compassion. What does God tell Joshua to do for the Canaanites that will help them along their way?
Put clothes on? I don't know.
No. Kill them all.
Oh, that's really helpful them get
Kill them all.
going.
And that's what God's going to say. You know, because these people are so disgusting, they're cursed. Kill them all. Not only kill them all, kill their animals too. Kill every living thing that's associated with Canaanites. Everything in the land, I want you to kill. Right now. And in fact, that becomes one of the problems. When they don't kill everything, becomes a problem in the book of Joshua. That they don't obey God and do it. Okay, so anyway, doesn't want him to marry a Canaanite girl, right? Instead, he wants his son to marry a girl
From his line.
from his family. That's every father would want
Yeah.
his son to marry a family girl. So go to the reunion and pick yourself out a wife. Sends them to the homeland. So the servant is going to the homeland to find a wife in this line. And that's better than a Canaanite. A cousin is better than a Canaanite. How does the servant respond?
Oh, who's going to do it?
Well, he asked some questions.
Yeah, what
right?
if the woman doesn't want to come
What
back?
if the woman does? Because I'm coming and say, hey, you want to come back with me to a land, to Canaan, and what if she says,
No.
no? Then what if I need to bring Isaac out?
No, he said no.
Abraham says,
No.
nope. Why is he concerned about Isaac going out from the land to meet his prospective
He
bride.
may stay.
He may stay. And remember, the promise isn't that he's just going to get land. The promise is he's going to get land where? Here.
Right, yeah, right where he is.
Here. So, you find a woman, ask her if she wants to come back, right? And if you can't find anybody, what's the deal?
He wanted to know if he should take his son back, and he
Yeah,
says
no, can't take the son back. But the servant said, what if I can't find anybody?
That's-
Abraham says, well,
Come on.
come home. The deal is, you've fulfilled, all I want you to do is give it a shot. And you will have fulfilled it. So the servant says, okay, I'm going. And so the oath is made, boom, they leave. The servant leaves.
After he put
Abraham
his hand under his thigh.
After he puts his hand under his thigh, says, I got you. And that must have been, it must have been a bony thigh. That must have been an awful thing. I mean, he'd been living in the desert for years. Yeah.
Never mind.
No. Okay, so the servant goes, what does the servant do? Now he departs and he's got what with him?
He's got valuable.
Oh, he's got valuable stuff. He's got what?
Clothes,
He's got clothes.
jewels.
He's got jewels. He's got to close the deal. Camels. My goodness gracious, this is an awful lot like my brother's first marriage. So got camels and jewels and clothes, and he's going. And where does he go?
Back.
He goes back home, right? Back to the old land, Nahor. And he goes back there and he's sitting outside the city, right? With his camels and all his stuff. And what does the servant do? And he happens to be at a well.
He prays.
Right? He says a little prayer. And what does he pray?
He asks God to show him the right woman.
Show me the right woman. But he puts kind of conditions on it. If it's the right woman, this is going to happen.
She'll give
Right?
me water and water my camels.
Okay. I'm at a well, right? If a woman comes out, gives me water, waters my camels, she's the one, right? That I'm going to approach. Okay? All right. So he does that. Now, by doing that, what is he showing? He's really showing faith, right? And this is not a surprise. It is the Lord's story. So faith becomes a big deal here. Not just obedience, but faith. Okay, and so he does it. He says the prayer, Amen. And he looks up, and what does he say?
Rebekah.
Boom, he sees Rebekah right there. And Rebekah, when he looks at Rebekah is
Very beautiful.
really good
One
looking.
hot chick.
Yeah, one hot chick. Yeah, she is
Unmarried, young.
hubba da hubba. Oh man.
Strong, she can carry a jar.
She must. Yeah, to water camels. She's really a stout woman. But she is.
I don't think she's stout.
Well, she's beautiful. She's beautiful, but I mean, she is carrying around.
Well, that's something they've done since they were little.
Yeah, well, she maybe. She's solid.
Just strong.
Well, remember.
The camels drink a lot of water.
Yeah, and remember, because according to the Jewish law, you were prohibited to work on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
On the Sabbath, and according as they broke the law down, what that meant, what would happen if, like, an animal fell into a ditch or a well? Did you have to leave the animal, like an ox? Would you have to leave the ox in a ditch until the Sabbath was over? And they said no, getting your ox out of a ditch would not be technically work. But if your wife fell in a well, she had to stay.
You're
Because
kidding.
getting a wife out of the well would be
You're kidding.
work. Yeah, which shows that women then were
weren't
they
worth
were
anything.
really stout. If it didn't take work to get an ox out of a ditch, but a woman out of a well, these were pretty big women. So anyway, she is there, and what ends up happening?
She takes him
She
back
takes
to her family.
Exactly what happens. And he says, I got a proposition for you. And she says, come on back.
Stay with-
I'm
stay
here.
with
Come
them.
on, meet my family. come on back to the house, we'll fix you some supper, and you can meet my family. And there's no hands under thighs going on here at all. And so what does he do when she empties her jug and she's got the water for it? When she says, okay,
Nose ring and bracelet.
yeah, it gives her a nose ring,
I'm thinking of a bull ring.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I hope her nose was pierced. If not, it was not much of a gift. But a nose ring, and he gives her bracelets, and so she's covered with bling, right?
Yeah, we're related.
And yeah, well, but when you look at, does that bother you?
I'm probably blushing.
Well, no, it's one of the things that's present in the ancient world. This is not an unusual practice. That you married in families. In fact, pharaohs in ancient Egypt often married within close families, like brothers and sisters would marry in ancient Egypt. And that's why you end up with some real issues.
Yeah.
Weird diseases.
Tutankhamun he was burdened with a lot of stuff. So it was because it was a lot of inbreeding. And the way to do it is if you believe that your line is special, particularly divine. Gods should have children by gods, just not people out there. Mm-hmm. So that was not uncommon at all. Cleopatra was married to her brother.
Oh, you know what? I really didn't know that.
Yeah, Cleopatra was married to her brother.
And didn't they all pretty much, even if the women were not real rich, they all wore some sort of...
Well, a lot of times what they
Jewelry.
wore was what they owned. So that's why you see even now, bracelets and necklaces with like coins on the bracelet, because that's what they could carry it. You didn't leave it someplace. So this girl's got all kinds of stuff, and she takes the servant back home. And what happens when he gets back home? Who does she meet when she gets back home?
Her father.
Meets her father. Her father's there. Who else is there? Her brother. And I think the writer wants us to notice this. How is her brother described? What's the first thing we get with her brother when she shows up there at the homestead?
We heard to meet her.
Yeah, he runs out to meet her, and what does the writer tell us that Laban, the brother, notices?
The nose ring and the bracelets, right?
He notices the nose ring and the bracelets. Not that her sister is home, or not that she's got a servant with her. He notices what?
The bling.
He notices that which has monetary value. And I think that's going to be really important, because Laban's going to play an important role, not only in this story, but an even more important role later in the Jacob story, which will be Isaac's son. He's going to play a big role, and I think the writer is establishing his character, or giving us a hint into his character, that this guy is very conscious of
Status.
wealth, status, money. He's very focused there. Okay,
At
so
least she went and told her mother's household, not her.
She what? Went and told her mother.
Yeah, the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. That's unusual.
you get a different take on that? Okay.
Yeah, it'd be like, Randy came home with a nose ring and bracelet, says, where in the world did you get those? Protected.
Oh, that Laban was going to be protective of her.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, it could be. Although Laban's going to be an interesting guy with Jacob a little bit later, but with his girls. But here he comes, and what does the servant do when he gets there?
Unloaded this stuff?
Yeah, well, he tells the people there what? The story. He tells them the story, right? So in the mind of the servant, what has occurred?
Lord led him to her.
The mission accomplished, right? You know, remember when George Bush flew on that boat, the crew with the big sign, mission accomplished? That's what he's putting out, mission accomplished.
Or he
We're
tells
done.
them how rich is.
Oh, yeah. Rich. Rich. Rich brother-in-law. That's interesting.
He's probably being
Yeah, we
argued
might note that a little bit. How does Laban and Bethuel, how do they respond?
The Lord has done this.
Okay, clearly the Lord
We have no
has
choice.
done that. Now, we haven't seen the Lord actively involved in this story, right? I mean, we haven't seen the Lord intervening actively, but we get a sense, based on what the servant says and what we see right here, that the Lord is watching, is involved in this. I mean, when the servant prays to the Lord and says, look, this is going to be the sign, this is what I'm looking for, bang, this is what happens. So we kind of get the sense that God is, or the Lord is working behind this. And
Maybe it has nothing to do with this story, but we've repeated that a couple times, that the servant asked for a sign. How many
Right.
times do we do that in our own life, and does that have any significance as to how we should look to the Lord when we're trying to make decisions?
what do you think?
I'm thinking it does.
Yeah, maybe.
This is maybe the first time that I've thought about it.
Yeah, maybe that would be a good thing to do. And then be aware after you do it to see how God may be working. Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. That maybe God is working all the time. The problem isn't that God isn't working; is that we're not
Listening.
listening or paying attention.
As we think of that often with the fleece, when they lay the fleece out and look for a change, a sign.
Right. Oh,
But that's
the fleece.
Yeah.
Back in I've lost it in Judges. Who is it? Lord have mercy. One of the judges, the one that lapped the water with his. Jeez, what's that? I can't. I've lost the name. That's awful. That's very embarrassing. You know, I should
say
know
that
that
guy.
name. That guy.
That guy.
Yeah. He's not. Yeah. All right. Anyway, but that's right. That maybe we need to pay closer attention. What he does here, and God's working. What happens the next day? So the brothers say. The brother and dad says, "Go." Right? It sounds like a good deal to me. God must be working. The next day, after they slept on it, they say what?
Let her stay for a week.
Well, you know, she's got a lot to do. She's got a lot of packing. So why don't we let her pack, and we'll send her 10 days later. And she will be able to keep the nose ring and the bracelets, right? You know, when she stays here. And you just go on down the road, and she stays here. And the servant says,
Ask her.
yeah, I'm not thinking that's going to be good. Why don't you ask her? And they ask her, and she says,
Yes.
I am
With
going.
this man right away.
And so they get up with the camels, and they go. And who is introduced into the story at verse 62? That we haven't seen at all in this?
Isaac.
Isaac is introduced, right? And this is in the south, so this is kind of a little southern story. And what happens? Isaac is out there, and the servant and the camels, and
You saw her coming.
he sees her coming, and he says, "Yowza." You know, yowza. And this is a little confusing. And again, we're talking about stories that they put together. Because when he sees her and he says, "Yowza," okay. Where does he take her?
Into his
Tent.
Into his tent? Into his mother's tent, Sarah's tent. Well, you know, what do we already know about Sarah?
She's dead.
She's
Dead.
dead. You know, she's dead. Evidently, you know, we're talking about stories not quite in order. you know, because they're being drawn from different sources. If you want to say, well, it was her tent, it still was there, it was empty, and he took her into, go for it. That, you know, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. I think it's just the story's out of order. You know, that this story was, Sarah was still alive, and it has just been placed after, in the organization after the death. And therefore it's no big deal. So anyway, we've got Isaac and Rebekah. Therefore the promise is going to continue, right?
Yeah.
Hot dog! We got the promise continuing through Isaac and Rebekah. Oh man, we just got to tie up one loose end. What's the loose end we got to tie up?
Abram's still alive.
Abraham is still alive, right? And old man?
Yeah.
Yeah, very old man, very old man.
Still having kids.
Yeah, and so what does, as an old man, what does he do?
Get married.
He gets married again. You know, not unlike my grandfather. Well, I don't even want to get into that. He ends up getting married to another woman, right? And evidently the childbearing issues aren't so great now, because what happens?
Man, he had a lot of kids.
Man, he has a lot of kids, right? And again, these kids become these Arab tribes. Each of them are named for an ancient Arab tribe. So he has really kids. But those children that he has, and they're the children of Abraham, right? They are not going to be the children of the promise. The promise is going to flow through
Isaac.
is going to flow through Isaac. Okay, but he gives, and it's clear, he gives them gifts,
Yeah, up before
and he sends them out. But it's Isaac is going to be the one that's going to inherit. And what eventually happens to Abraham? He breathes his last. He must have been tired, you know. And what do they do with him?
They buried him beside Sarah.
They bury him beside Sarah. And why is that significant?
Because that was his ground.
Because that's his ground. So he is now in the land that God has promised. And who shows up for the funeral, or who kind of directs the funeral?
Laban.
Well, we got who? Who we got at the funeral?
Isaac.
We got Isaac and Ishmael, you know, half-brothers. There at the funeral, and then the writer tells us what about Ishmael?
Oh Lord.
What's their names?
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of kids. You know, he tells us that Ishmael is going to have kids. And why are we not surprised that Ishmael is going to have a whole bunch of kids? Because God said to Ishmael, and Hagar said to Hagar, your son, I'm going to take care of him. He's going to be the father of a lot of nations too. Just won't be the child of the promise, but he's going to be fine. And so we got Ishmael fulfilling this promise by having a whole passel of kids. So God has fulfilled his promise to Hagar and Ishmael. So at the point of Abraham's death, what's the situation?
Well, both of the half-brothers were there.
Both of the half-brothers are there. Abraham is now dead. What's the situation?
God bless the son Isaac.
Isaac, we got Isaac standing there. Ishmael got a bunch of kids. Isaac is standing there. Last thing Abraham did before well, not the last thing, but, you know, late on his list. What did he do for Isaac? Got Isaac a wife.
And blessed him.
Blessed him.
He had children.
Abraham's going. We got Isaac. We got Rebekah. The story has to be a good one, right? It's got to be good.
Kind of, in a way, it's kind of surprising that him and his brother didn't sort of haggle over, why don't I get as much as you? I'm his son too. Thing, you know, but it doesn't say they did.
Doesn't say they did. Just says, why? Let me ask. Why would that not be part of the story? Thinking about what the writer wants to communicate. Remember this, he's not getting down objective history.
God's plan?
Well, that's right. His goal is that God's plan is going to work itself out. And who's in control of God's plan?
God is.
God is in control of God's plan. Like I said before, this is the story of God. You know, this is God's story. How God is working out this covenant that he made. Human beings are involved, but this is God's story. And if they're haggling and come to a decision, then that's not God's story. That's their story. But here it's God working it through. So now we've got the child of the promise with a wife ready to have kids. We can expect what in the next chapter?
Kids.
We can expect a whole bunch of kids being born of Rebekah, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, boy, that'll work it out. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you for guiding us through this. Remind us that you're engaged and active all around us, whether we recognize it or not. Therefore, help us to be open to see your involvement. Help us to be open to seek it, and help us to be open to see it. And then help us to respond. Enable us to do that in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, next week we'll look at 25:19 through 28:9, and we'll be looking at Isaac and Rebekah. Because I'm sure they're not going to have any trouble having kids, right? I mean, geez Louise, shouldn't have any problem with kids.
That guy's name Gideon. No.
Gideon! Thank you, Alice. Give Alice a round of applause. Gideon. That's it. Thank you. I think when Gideon was fighting the Midianites. Yeah, and I mean it's this neat little story about the fleece and whether it's going to be dry and whether it's Gideon. Yes, thank you, Alice. Thank you so much.
I was going to say something, but I forgot.
Well, that